after covering the principles and philosophies that go into Catholic morality a couple weeks ago, we moved into the second phase of this larger discussion of morality, which I'm calling evaluating morality, where we will look at the attitudes and dispositions and actions and compare them to the moral principles that we've already learned. And we began to do that a couple of weeks ago by talking about the 7 deadly sins. We covered the first 2, pride and envy, and today we're going to cover the remaining 5. The third deadly sin is anger. Sometimes it's referred to as wrath. Wrath is the sort of an unreasonable desire for revenge. I've been hurt and I'm going to get even. And this often results in an outburst of hostility. Anger blinds and deafens us, but we have to be careful that the first step in anger is an emotion. It's a feeling, and feelings aren't sins. We don't have control over what angers us, but what we do have control over is how we respond to anger. So anger doesn't really become a sin until we respond poorly. Swearing, shouting, fighting, brooding over injuries or insults, desiring revenge, those sorts of things. When we let anger stew in us in these ways, it leads to hatred. And hatred is where we wish evil upon someone else. And that's the truly sinful part of anger. The remedy for anger is patience and forgiveness. Patience allows us to endure evil without harboring destructive feelings. Usually when we give ourselves a chance to sort of cool off, anger dissipates, and so we're able to think clearly again. And this forgiveness, this patience, it has to be a persistent thing. My mother put this beautifully in her Bible study a couple of weeks ago, where she said, Jesus outlines a process for dealing with those in the community who are in serious sin. Christians should respond to sins committed against them with unlimited forgiveness. Jesus said, not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. In other words, endlessly, constantly, and without calculation. So there's anger and the church's recommended remedy for anger. Now for some practical advice regarding anger. And that is to simply forgive quickly, to sort of get over yourself quickly. Once you're no longer seeing red, we need to make a swift effort to forgive, to deal with it immediately. Paul gives us good advice in his letter to the Ephesians, where he says, be angry, but do not sin, and do not let the sun set on your anger. In other words, don't wait until a later date to deal with your anger. And Jesus is of the same mind as St. Paul. In Matthew's Gospel, he says, therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and they recall that your brother has anything against you, leave your gift there at the altar, go first and be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. So, in other words, stop what you're doing. Don't do anything else until you've dealt with this forgiveness. Settle things right then and there. So that's anger. The 4th deadly sin is sloth. Sloth is laziness or indifference towards spiritual things. Another way that sloth can appear is that we kind of fear doing something difficult. It's a desire. Sloth is a desire to do nothing or desire to just do, trivial things. Sloth is a desire for ease and comfort. And sloth might be attractive to someone who desires a life of comfort, but it also leads to other vices. And that's what makes sloth the 4th deadliest of the 7 deadly sins, because it leads to other sins. One of the most famous examples in the Bible is the story of King David, where it says, at the turn of the year, the time when kings go to war, David sent out Joab along with his officers and all Israel, and they laid waste the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. David himself, though, remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David rose from his bed and strolled about on the roof of the king's house. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. She was very beautiful. And you probably know the rest of the story. David has Bathsheba's husband Uriah killed, and he takes this woman for his wife. But how did it all start? He was supposed to be at war with his soldiers, leading them as their king, but instead he was sort of lazing about the palace. And that laziness led to his lust, which led to his covetousness, which led to Uriah's death. And in this way, sloth can be one of the deadliest of sins because it can be the hidden source of a lot of our spiritual problems. Habitual sins of the flesh, like gluttony or lust, we can be afraid because of sloth of the hard work that it takes to undo those things, the hard work that it takes to overcome sins that we become attached to and habituated to. As the saying goes, the idle mind is the devil's workshop. A lot of people fall into certain types of sins simply because they're bored. Sloth can also extend to our piousness, our religiosity. If we ignore our religious obligations out of laziness, bad things happen. The church doesn't say that we have to go to Mass and receive the sacraments arbitrarily. The church doesn't make us do these things just to give us something to follow, some rules to follow. It's for our own good, because when we receive the sacraments, we receive the grace to overcome temptation. And I've noticed this happens quite often. If somebody misses a Sunday Mass, it's a whole lot easier for them to just go on and keep on missing Masses after that. And it's because if we're not receiving God's grace in the sacraments, then we're not making spiritual progress. There's 3 remedies for sloth, and they all kind of go hand in hand. The first one is zeal. Zeal meaning excitement about our faith, being, quote-unquote, on fire with the faith. The faith is anything but boring. We just have to open ourselves up to see that it isn't boring. And then following zeal is perseverance. We struggle through adversity. We might not feel like doing something. We might feel rather like being lazy, but we do it anyway. We might fail at something, but we get up and we try it again. And the third remedy for sloth is diligence, keeping focused on the task at hand and not getting distracted by other things. And Jesus talks about this in Luke's Gospel, chapter 18. He told them a parable about the necessity for them to pray always without becoming weary. He said, "There was a judge in a certain town who neither feared God nor respected any human being, and a widow in that town used to come to him and say, 'Render a just decision for me against my adversary.' For a long time the judge was unwilling, but eventually he thought, 'While it is true that I neither fear God nor respect any human being, because this widow keeps bothering me, I shall deliver a just decision for her, lest she finally come and strike me.' The Lord said, 'Pay attention to what the dishonest judge says. Will not God then secure the rights of his chosen ones who call out to him day and night?'" It's one of my favorite parables. It's hilarious. The judge is comically evil. But the point is made. Persistence is necessary. And if persistence will convince this evil person to do the right thing, then how much more will God give us when we are persevere? There's another passage from Luke's Gospel earlier that Jesus explains the importance of perseverance again. He said to them, "Suppose one of you has a friend whom he goes at midnight and says, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread, for a friend of mine has arrived at my house from a journey, and I have nothing to offer him.' And he says in reply from within, 'Do not bother me. The door has already been locked, and my children and I are already in bed. I cannot get up to give you anything.' I tell you, if he does not get up to give him the loaves because of their friendship, he will get up to give him whatever he needs because of his persistence." So remain persistent and persevere when we're tempted to be lazy. Just keep doing it even when you don't feel like doing it. The advice that I would give to work against the sin of sloth is to be very goal-oriented. Keep a list of things that you could be doing or should be doing. I keep a running list on my phone of things, big and small, that I have to do around the house. And when I have free time, I do those things instead of sit around and scroll on my phone. So have a mission, and that's what I would say on the practical, everyday stuff when it comes to sloth. Now, spiritually speaking, the church gives us things to do when it comes to the religious aspect of sloth. When we don't feel like living out our faith, we feel like being lazy in our faith, the church gives us an entire list of things that will keep us from being that kind of lazy, and they're called the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And these are sort of ways to keep our religious muscles exercised. These are spiritual and physical actions that we can do out of charity for others. So first, the corporal works of mercy. The word corporal comes from the Latin word corporis, which means body. So the corporal works of mercy are physical, bodily things that we can do for others. There's 7 of them, and they are Give food to the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, shelter the homeless, visit the imprisoned, care for the sick, clothe the naked, and bury the dead. And we can all think of creative ways to do these things. Back in December, I was sitting with Bill and Shar Knott at Barb Pfeiffer's funeral in Arapahoe, and my best friend Scott Yates was with me. And Shar was talking about how she does the hair for Dallas Gary at the funeral home, how she helps make them look nice for their funeral. And Scott said, "Oh, I worked in the funeral business for years," and he did. That's a corporal work of mercy. You are helping to bury the dead. And Shar was like, "Well, I never thought of it that way." But it is. It is a spiritual work of mercy. It helps us exercise those spiritual muscles to prevent us from being lazy in our faith. The point of the corporal works of mercy is that they're probably easier than we think, and if we recognize and are aware of them, we can perform them even more than we already do. And likewise, I said there's 7 corporal works of mercy. There's 7 spiritual works of mercy, and these have to do with the ways that we can be of spiritual service to other people. They are pray for the living and the dead, instructing the ignorant, counsel the doubtful, admonish the sinner, bear patiently the troublesome, comfort the afflicted, and forgive offenses. And I think we can all stand to work on these as well. The corporal works of mercy, they're perhaps more glamorous, but the spiritual works of mercy will not only help us to get to heaven, but it will help others as well when we are instructing them and counseling them. The 5th deadly sin is greed. Greed is also known as avarice, and avarice is the inordinate love of and desire for money or possessions. Greed is trying to amass as much stuff as possible. And for the truly greedy, and this is the ultimate end of greed, is that there is no end. There's never enough. They have to have more. Greed could be an indicator of our mistrust in God. I doubt that God will take care of me, so I better gather as much as I can in case there's no more later, in case he will not provide. But for those who have much, much is required in gift. St. Ambrose said, "If you have 2 shirts, one belongs to you and the other to the man who has no shirt." Cardinal George, he was the former Archbishop of Chicago, he once said, "The poor need the rich to draw them out of poverty, and the rich need the poor to keep them out of hell." Are we greedy? Ask ourselves, how much time do I spend worrying about money or possessions? How painful is it for me to give things away? What do I spend my money on? Jesus is very clear on this matter. In Luke's gospel, he tells the parable of the rich landowner, where he said, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' Then he said, 'This is what I will do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God.'" In Matthew's gospel, he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So that's how we identify greed in our heart. What are the things we truly value, we truly treasure? And that'll identify greed in our hearts. So if that's identifying it, then what's the remedy? The remedy is pretty simple. It's generosity. Freely giving away our possessions, our time, our talents. The more generous you are, the more detached from material things you'll become. So here's my advice for generosity, is just to get in the habit of giving. I'm not saying give it to the church. Give it to whatever you feel is worth your time. There is a great need right now. I will tell you, I know the middle class might feel the pinch of the cost of living, but the poor are really suffering right now. They're falling behind on rent. They're falling behind on utilities. They don't have enough money to put fuel in their cars. I know because I'm the one that they call, and I'm having to turn people away because we've depleted our cash funds for emergencies. And it's been a few years since we have actively tried to ask to fill it. So I am frugal with it, with the money. If I only ask for emergency fund money every few years, but if you feel called to lend to our cash fund for the poor, just mark it on an envelope and put it in the collection. I think there's a little thing in the bulletin how to do that. Works best with actual cash, though. I originally had planned this homily for last weekend, but then we had the fires, so we just prayed for the firefighters instead of a homily. But I want to take us back to last weekend's gospel. It's one of my favorite gospels where Jesus heals the blind man. And it says, as Jesus passed by, he saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. The works of God might be made visible through him. So, in other words, Jesus is saying that he was blind, born blind, so that the works of God might be made visible. That this man's blindness was an opportunity for others to grow in holiness, for God to be made apparent. And in the case of Jesus, the blind man made Jesus' identity as a healer and a forgiver of sins apparent, and so glorified God. But in our case, we can glorify God in serving the poor. Like Cardinal George said, the poor are there to keep us out of hell. So, on our part, we need to not be like the disciples who asked, well, who sinned, this man or his parents? Don't ask the reason why someone is poor. Don't assume that they'll throw it away on cigarettes, booze, or drugs. They very well might, but that's not our concern. That isn't the gospel message. Jesus didn't, run a background check on everybody that he helped. He didn't check to make sure that the poor would use his gifts wisely. And in fact, many of them didn't even say thank you after Jesus had healed them. But that wasn't a qualifier for him. He simply gave. The sixth deadly sin is gluttony. Gluttony is immoderate pleasure in food or drink, particularly alcohol, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying a nice meal or a couple of drinks. I took my parents out to the Copper Mill a couple of weeks ago. We ate way too much. I don't think we were gluttonous, though. But if those things, though, become the center of our life, that is excessive. And that's what addiction can become. In a way, it turns into a god for us. And in extreme cases where it leads to health issues or even life-threatening issues, we're essentially saying, I am willing to die for this thing. I'm willing to lay down my life for this bottle. And it never affects just us, whether we realize it or not. The people in our lives are impacted by these sorts of things. The remedy for gluttony is asceticism. Asceticism simply means self-denial, fasting, restricting the amount of food and drink taken, or abstinence, which means avoiding a particular kind of food altogether. Occasional fasting and abstinence, it promotes self-control. And temperance, it's needed for the spiritual life. And that's why we emphasize these things during Lent. And the advice that I would give when it comes to gluttony is to perhaps try to cut one food ingredient out of your diet. And try that for a year, whether it's alcohol or added sugar or certain types of fats. And do that not as a health goal, but as a spiritual goal. We accept asceticism readily for our physical health. Intermittent fasting is a big diet trend right now because it's proven to work. But how about intermittent fasting for our spiritual health as well? The seventh deadly sin is lust. Lust is treating another human being as a means to satisfying desires, treating or imagining others as objects to serve our own pleasures rather than seeing them as persons made in the image and likeness of God. And what happens in lust is that this depersonalizes both the person being objectified, but it also depersonalizes the person having the lustful desires. The remedy for lust is, of course, chastity. Chastity is a virtue that moderates sexual desire, refuses to see others as objects, and even married couples are called to chastity, because married couples are not called to view their spouse as a means of satisfaction. If you really think about it, unless you can say to another person, even your spouse, I don't need you, if you can't say that, then you are not living a life of chastity. Because if you need that person, then they serve some kind of utility to you. People are meant to be wanted, not needed. Love is valuing the person for their own sake, desiring what is best for them, not using them to get what's best for me. And for more on remedies of lust, you can refer back to my series of homilies in the fall on the theology of the body. And that's the end of the 7 deadly sins. Next, we'll be looking at evaluating morality from the perspective of the 10 Commandments.